Welcome to this deep dive, and we're going to be talking all about Halloween.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah, so you've given us a ton of information here,
Yeah.
mostly from Wikipedia's Halloween entry,
Mm.
and you want to understand, like, what makes this holiday tick.
Right.
So we're going to go way beyond costumes and candy this time.
Deeper.
Yeah, and look at, like, the historical roots
Yeah.
and the evolution of Halloween.
I love it.
So, for example, did you know that jack-o'-lanterns were originally carved from turnips?
What?
Yeah, turnips, not pumpkins. And that trick-or-treating might be linked to this medieval practice of giving out soul cakes.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really interesting stuff.
It is interesting. Halloween is this fascinating blend
Yeah.
of Christian beliefs and older traditions,
Yeah.
maybe even some pagan influences.
Right.
And you get this really unique mix of the sacred and the spooky,
Yeah.
which is what makes it so interesting to unpack.
I agree. Okay, so let's start with the name itself.
Okay.
Halloween comes from All Hallows Eve, the evening before All Saints' Day.
Yes,
So right off the bat, we're in Christian territory.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Because All Saints' Day wasn't always celebrated on November 1st.
Hmm.
So historians think that maybe it was moved for a few reasons.
Okay.
Imagine Rome in the summer, like flooded with pilgrims.
Yeah.
It would have been very difficult to manage.
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention the public health concerns.
Right, in the heat.
Exactly.
So logistics and avoiding a meltdown.
Exactly.
Okay.
But there's also this theory connected to Pope Gregory III.
Okay.
Back in the 8th century, he dedicated this oratory. It's a special chapel for relics of the saints.
Okay.
And some historians think this is connected to the November 1st date for All Saints' Day.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how establishing a place to venerate saints may have shaped how we celebrate Halloween today.
Okay, so that's interesting about the saints, but how do we get from honoring saints to trick-or-treating? Like,
Right.
what's the connection there?
Okay, well, this is where we start to see those threads of older traditions,
Like-
potentially even pagan ones,
Mm.
intertwining with Christian practices.
Okay.
So in medieval times, there was this custom called souling.
Okay.
And this is where people, often children, would go door to door, not for candy,
Right.
but for these little cakes called soul cakes.
So instead of dressing up like superheroes or princesses,
Yeah.
they were going door to door for cakes.
Yes, and here's the fascinating part. They would sing and pray
Wow.
for the souls of the dead in exchange for these cakes.
Interesting.
It was a very somber religious act,
Wow.
and even more interesting, the cakes were often marked with crosses.
So different from the Halloween we know today.
I know, it's very different.
Yeah, so you're saying that trick-or-treating with the costumes and the candy
Right.
might have evolved from this much more serious tradition.
It's a compelling theory.
Yeah.
It suggests that the basic structure of trick-or-treating, going door-to-door receiving treats, could have its roots in souling. Over time, that religious aspect faded away,
Yeah.
and it morphed into this more playful, secular event that we're familiar with today.
It's amazing how traditions can change so much over time.
It is fascinating.
Yeah, speaking of changes, Halloween wasn't always a big deal in America, was it?
You're right.
Didn't the early colonists have kind of a different view of it?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Halloween wasn't widely celebrated in early America.
Mm,
In fact, groups like the Puritans actually opposed it.
really?
Yeah, they found the roots and potential connection to paganism unacceptable.
So how did Halloween become like such a huge phenomenon in America then?
Well, it's largely thanks to a wave of immigration in the 19th century,
Okay.
particularly from Ireland and Scotland.
Okay.
And these immigrants brought their familiar Halloween customs with them.
Yeah.
And over time, those traditions started to take root in American culture.
So those immigrants really played a key role in shaping how Americans celebrate Halloween today.
Absolutely.
What?
And it's interesting to note that even within America, there were regional variations.
Okay.
For instance, Cajun communities in Louisiana had their own unique Halloween traditions.
Like what?
Well, they'd hold these nighttime masses in cemeteries and keep vigil by graves,
Oh, wow.
honoring the dead in a way that was quite distinct from the emerging mainstream Halloween celebrations.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
It shows how even within a single country, traditions can be adapted and interpreted in different ways.
right.
But ultimately, it was America's enthusiastic embrace of Halloween
Yes.
that helped propel it onto the global stage.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was in the 20th century that America really ran with Halloween transforming it into this commercialized spectacle we know today.
Right, with the costumes and the candy and the decorations.
Exactly.
Yeah, and of course, no Halloween celebration would be complete without the iconic jack-o'-lantern.
Of course.
But did people really carve turnips instead of pumpkins back in the day?
Yes, you heard that right.
Re-
Turnips were the original jack-o'-lanterns, especially in Ireland and Britain.
Hmm.
They were seen as representing souls,
Yeah.
or even as a way to ward off evil spirits.
So how did the pumpkin become the go-to then?
Well, when those Irish immigrants arrived in North America,
Yeah.
they discovered pumpkins,
Uh-huh.
and pumpkins were much easier to carve.
Okay.
Plus, they were significantly larger.
Right, so more space for creativity.
Exactly.
Well,
It was a practical choice that quickly caught on.
yeah, now it's hard to imagine Halloween without those grinning pumpkin faces.
It's true.
And speaking of spooky faces, we can't forget the tale of Stingy Jack.
Oh, yes, the legend behind the jack-o'-lantern itself.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Okay, so the story goes that Stingy Jack tricked the devil,
Uh-huh.
not once, but twice.
Hmm.
But when Jack died, neither heaven nor hell would accept him.
Oh, no.
So the devil, in a final act of mischief, gave Jack a burning ember inside a carved-out turnip to
Okay.
light his way as he wandered for eternity.
Wow, it's a story that perfectly captures that blend of mischief and folklore and superstition that surrounds Halloween.
It does.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this holiday has always been about more than just fun and games.
Absolutely. Halloween has layers.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that for many people, it still has deep connections to faith and remembrance.
So beyond the costumes and the candy,
Right.
there are those who see Halloween as a time for reflection and connecting with those who have passed on.
Exactly. Some people attend church vigils,
Great.
pray for the dead,
Mm-hmm.
and visit cemeteries to light candles.
Yeah, it's a time to remember and honor loved ones who are no longer with us.
Precisely.
And how do different Christian denominations view Halloween today?
Well, it's actually quite diverse.
Okay.
Some denominations embrace Halloween's historical roots,
Mm-hmm.
seeing it as a time for remembering saints and reflecting on mortality.
Right.
Others view it more critically,
Right.
concerned about its perceived ties to paganism and the occult.
So it's a complex issue with a range of interpretations.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even within a single religion,
Right.
there can be a spectrum of beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
And Halloween seems to be a focal point for some of those different views.
It's fascinating to see how one holiday can spark such a variety of responses.
It really is.
Yeah, this deep dive is already making me see Halloween in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear it. And we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating holiday.
Okay, I'm ready to keep exploring.
All right.
What other fascinating insights do you have in store for us?
Well, let's talk about how Halloween went global.
Okay.
Because it's not just an American or even a European holiday anymore.
Right.
It's celebrated all over the world, but with some interesting twists and turns depending on where you are.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. Halloween is kind of like a chameleon.
Okay.
As it's spread around the world, it's taken on, different colors and patterns,
Okay.
blending with local customs and beliefs.
So we've got this global tapestry of Halloween traditions, each with its own unique flavor.
Exactly.
Give me some examples. I'm picturing Halloween in Japan with costumes inspired by like anime and manga.
That would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Japan does have a growing interest in Halloween with costume parties and themed events.
Okay.
But their traditional festivals honoring ancestors like Oban
Mm-hmm.
still hold a much deeper cultural significance.
Ah, so Halloween is more of a fun, imported celebration in Japan
Yep.
rather than like a deeply rooted tradition.
Right, but in other places like Mexico,
Okay.
Halloween blends with existing customs in really interesting ways.
Okay. Ha.
Well, think about the Day of the Dead,
Right.
this vibrant celebration of life and death that coincides with Halloween.
Yeah.
While they're separate holidays, they share this focus on remembering and honoring loved ones who have passed on.
That's right. The Day of the Dead is all about welcoming the spirits of the deceased back home,
Mm-hmm.
celebrating their memory with food and music and colorful decorations.
Precisely.
Right.
And that celebration of life, even in the face of death,
Right.
adds a whole other dimension to how Halloween is experienced in Mexico.
Okay.
It's not just about spooky costumes and candy.
Mm-hmm.
It's about acknowledging the cycle of life and death and maintaining those connections with those who have passed on.
Wow. That adds a whole new layer of depth to Halloween. I'm starting to see how this holiday is so much more than just like a superficial celebration of all things spooky.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just Mexico where we see these fascinating cultural blends.
Okay.
In Ireland, for example,
Yeah.
Halloween is still deeply connected to its Celtic roots,
Okay.
with bonfires and fireworks playing a significant role in the celebrations.
Mm.
These traditions harken back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain,
Okay.
which marked the end of summer and the beginning of the darker half of the year.
So the bonfires and fireworks aren't just for show.
Right.
They're symbolic remnants of this ancient festival, a way of connecting with the past. It's like Halloween is a bridge between ancient beliefs and modern celebrations.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And, even that seemingly silly tradition of trick-or-treating
Right.
has its own fascinating history.
Okay.
You'd be surprised to learn that in some parts of Europe, Halloween is still associated with more mischievous pranks.
Pranks.
Yeah.
Like what? Toilet papering houses and ringing doorbells.
But traditionally, the pranks were a bit more spirited.
Okay.
For example, in Brittany, France,
Okay.
there was a custom of placing candles inside skulls in graveyards
What?
to scare people passing by at night.
Oh my gosh, that's a different level of Halloween prank.
Right. Imagine stumbling upon that in the darkness.
Yeah, it's interesting how those regional variations have persisted even with the global influence of the more commercialized Halloween we see in America.
You're right. It shows how traditions can be both adaptable and resilient,
Yeah.
evolving over time while still retaining some of their original character.
Okay.
But speaking of commercialization, we can't ignore the fact that Halloween has become a huge industry,
Yeah.
particularly in the United States.
Yeah. Those decorations and costumes and mountains of candy don't come cheap.
They don't.
I'm curious, how much do Americans spend on Halloween each year?
Well, you might be surprised to hear that in 2023, Americans were projected to spend a whopping $12.2 billion on Halloween.
What?
Yeah, and of that, almost $4 billion was just on home decorations.
Wow, that's a lot of spooky spending.
It is.
It seems like Halloween has gone from a relatively simple observance to this massive cultural phenomenon.
It really has.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to consider how that commercialization has impacted the way we celebrate.
Right.
On the one hand, it's made Halloween more accessible and in some ways more creative,
Yeah.
but it's also raised questions about whether we've lost sight of the holiday's original meaning.
It's a good point. Sometimes it feels like we're so focused on the costumes and candy that we forget about like the deeper themes of remembrance and reflection and our relationship with mortality.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to delve beneath the surface and understand the rich history and cultural significance of this holiday.
Right. There's so much more to Halloween than meets the eye.
Absolutely.
Okay. We've talked about how Halloween has evolved over time, how it's traveled across continents and taken on new forms,
Right.
and even how it's become this major commercial event.
Yeah.
What about those spooky games and activities that are so closely associated with Halloween?
Yes.
Weren't some of them originally meant to be more than just fun and games?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Many of the traditional Halloween games, especially in Ireland and Britain, were actually divination rituals.
Divination rituals?
Yeah.
What?
They were seen as ways to glimpse into the future,
Oh.
especially when it came to matters of love, death, and marriage.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Tell me more about these divination games. Did they involve like crystal balls and tarot cards?
Not quite. They often involved simple objects,
Okay.
like apples and hazelnuts,
Ap-
which were believed to hold symbolic meanings.
Okay.
For instance, there was this tradition of peeling an apple in one long strip
Okay.
and then tossing the peel over your shoulder.
Hmm.
And the shape the peel made on the ground was said to reveal the first letter of your future spouse's name.
That's so creative. I can just imagine people gathered around eagerly examining those apple peels for clues about their love lives.
Exactly. And then there was the practice of roasting hazelnuts near a fire.
Okay.
You'd place two nuts side by side,
Mm.
one representing you and the other representing your love interest.
Okay.
If the nuts roasted quietly,
Yeah.
it was seen as a good omen for the relationship.
Ah.
But if they jumped away from the heat, that was considered a bad sign.
Poor hazelnuts bearing the weight of all those romantic hopes and fears.
I don't know, right?
So these games weren't just for fun.
Right.
They were taken quite seriously as glimpses into the mysteries of fate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were a way for people to try and understand the unpredictable nature of life and death, and perhaps even exert a little control over their destinies.
It's fascinating how people throughout history have sought answers to those big questions
Yeah.
through rituals and traditions, and Halloween, with its blend of the sacred and the spooky, provided a perfect backdrop for these explorations.
You're absolutely right. It's a time when the veil between the worlds feels thin,
Yeah.
when the boundaries between the living and the dead
Yeah.
blur,
Right.
and anything seems possible. And speaking of blurring boundaries, we can't forget about the tradition of wearing costumes on Halloween.
Yes, costumes are such an integral part of Halloween.
But they are.
But I'm curious about their origins. Did people always dress up in spooky outfits?
Well, the tradition of wearing costumes on Halloween goes way back.
Okay.
But the reasons behind it were quite different from what we might assume today.
Okay.
In earlier times, costumes served a dual purpose.
Okay.
They were seen as a way to imitate spirits
Mm-hmm.
and in a way to protect oneself from them.
It's like saying if you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly. By dressing up like supernatural beings,
Mm-hmm.
people believed they could blend in with the spirits
Yeah.
that were thought to be active on Halloween,
Right.
avoiding their wrath.
So costumes were more about camouflage and protection than about self-expression.
Precisely. But of course, over time, the emphasis shifted.
Okay.
Costumes became less about warding off evil spirits and more about embracing the fun and fantasy of Halloween.
And nowadays, costumes are all about creativity and individuality.
Absolutely.
From spooky to silly homemade to elaborate, they're a way to let your imagination run wild and celebrate the lighter side of the holiday.
Absolutely. And who doesn't love the thrill of transforming into someone or something else,
Yeah.
even if just for a night?
Yeah.
It's a chance to step outside of yourself and embrace the magic of Halloween.
Okay, we've talked costumes, games, and those fascinating divination rituals.
Right.
What else is there to uncover about this spooky holiday? What about those haunted houses? Are they a relatively modern invention? Or do they have deep historical roots too?
The idea of creating spooky spaces to thrill and scare people has been around for centuries.
Okay.
But the first purpose-built haunted attraction, known as the Orton and Spooner Ghost House,
Mhm.
actually opened in 1915 in Liphook, England.
Wait, England? I always assumed haunted houses were an American creation.
It is interesting that the first recorded haunted attraction popped up in England.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite the elaborate haunted house we think of today, though.
Okay.
It was more like a carnival funhouse powered by steam.
Powered by steam, that sounds both fascinating and terrifying.
I know, right?
Imagine all those clanking gears and hissing pipes adding to the spooky atmosphere.
It must have been quite an experience.
Yeah.
Then, in the 1930s, Halloween-themed haunted houses started appearing in America.
Okay.
Around the same time that trick-or-treating gained popularity.
Okay.
They really started to take off in the late 1950s, especially in California.
Mm.
By the 1960s, they were popping up all over the country.
So the rise of the haunted house was closely tied to the growing popularity of Halloween itself, as it became more about fun and entertainment than solemn remembrance.
Right. It reflects how Halloween evolved from a somewhat somber holiday with deep religious roots
Yeah.
into a celebration of all things spooky and fun.
Okay.
And of course, nowadays, haunted houses have become incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah. Some of those special effects are mind-blowing.
I know.
You've got animatronics, elaborate sets, professional actors jumping out at you.
Right.
It's like stepping into a horror movie.
And theme parks have played a huge role in elevating the haunted house experience.
Mm-hmm.
Think about Six Flags Fright Fest
Mm-hmm.
or Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights.
Yeah.
They've really taken haunted attractions to a whole new level.
They've become destinations in themselves,
Right.
drawing in huge crowds eager for a good scare.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to think how far haunted houses have come from those early carnival fun houses.
It really is a testament to our fascination with the macabre
Yeah.
and our desire to be safely scared.
Right. But you know, what would Halloween be without its delicious, often spooky-themed food?
Oh, yes.
Especially the treats and sweets that make this holiday so irresistible.
You know, Halloween has its roots in Christian traditions.
Yeah.
And many denominations encouraged abstinence from meat on All Hallows Eve.
Okay.
And this actually led to various vegetarian foods becoming associated with the holiday.
So meatless meals for Halloween. That's fascinating. What kind of dishes are we talking about? Was it just bread and water?
Not quite. One traditional treat is barmbrack,
Okay.
an Irish fruitcake with hidden charms baked inside.
Oh.
Finding a ring signifies marriage, a coin represents wealth, and so on.
So it's like a spooky fortune cookie.
Exactly.
You get a delicious treat and a glimpse into your future all in one.
Right, and of course we can't forget about soul cakes, those little treats given to soulless people, often children who went door to door singing and praying for the dead
Right.
in exchange for prayers for the dead.
Soul cakes, we've come full circle back to those medieval treats.
Yes.
That may have paved the way for modern-day trick-or-treating.
Right.
It's incredible how food can weave together different threads of history and tradition.
It truly is. And let's not forget about another iconic Halloween treat, the candy apple.
Oh, yes. Candy apples.
Sticky sweet,
Sticky sweet and sometimes a little bit messy.
Right.
But wait, didn't those fall out of favor because of some scary rumors?
You're right, there were widespread fears about people tampering with candy
Yeah.
apples, embedding things like pins and razor blades.
Really?
Thankfully, actual cases were extremely rare,
Okay, good.
and those rumors turned out to be mostly urban legend.
Phew, I'm glad to hear that. But it's understandable why parents were concerned.
Yeah.
Halloween can bring out some mischievous behavior.
It can?
Said hopefully no one would ever go that far.
Right. Halloween is meant to be fun and a bit spooky,
Yeah.
not dangerous.
Yeah.
And while candy apples might not be as common as they once were, they're still a beloved Halloween treat.
Okay, so we've explored the historical roots of Halloween treats,
We-
the symbolism of divination games, and the evolution of haunted houses and costumes.
Right.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
What does this all mean? What are the key takeaways for our listener?
Well, what's remarkable about Halloween is its adaptability.
Yeah.
It's a holiday that has constantly evolved,
Right.
absorbing and reflecting the beliefs and practices of different cultures.
It's true. It's a holiday that has seamlessly blended ancient traditions with modern sensibilities.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating mix of the sacred and the secular, the spooky and the sweet.
It's a celebration of life and death, of the sacred and the profane, of
Yeah.
the lighthearted and the macabre.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that even in the face of mortality,
Mm-hmm.
there's always room for a little bit of fun, a little bit of mischief,
Yeah.
and a whole lot of imagination. It's interesting to consider how different cultures view death and remembrance,
That's a good point.
especially beyond like the Western lens.
Halloween, with its mix of reverence and fear and humor,
Right.
reflects a very specific cultural perspective.
It does.
But other cultures approach these themes in vastly different ways.
Absolutely.
Right.
For example, in some Asian cultures,
Okay.
the emphasis is on ancestor veneration
Mm-hmm.
and the continuation of those family bonds even after death.
Right.
Festivals like the Ghost Festival in China and Pitru Paksha in Hinduism
Okay.
honor and appease the spirits of the deceased.
So instead of fearing the spirits of the dead,
Yeah,
these traditions are about maintaining those connections with loved ones who have passed on,
exactly.
ensuring their well-being in the afterlife.
Precisely, it's about remembering and honoring them, making sure they're cared for in the spirit world.
Okay, and in Mexico, the Day of the Dead, which takes place around the same time as Halloween,
Yeah,
is a vibrant celebration of life and death.
it is.
It's a time to remember and honor loved ones who have passed, but it's also a joyous occasion,
Right.
filled with music and food and colorful decorations.
Absolutely.
So it's not a mournful occasion.
Yeah.
It's more about celebrating the lives of those who have passed on.
Exactly. It's a recognition that death is a natural part of the cycle of life,
Okay.
and it's celebrated with joy and remembrance rather than fear or sadness.
It's a beautiful way to think about death and remembrance.
It is.
It's a reminder that death is not an end, but a transition.
Precisely. And by remembering and honoring those who have passed,
Mm-hmm.
we keep their memory alive and celebrate the impact they had on our lives.
I love that perspective. It's so life-affirming.
It is.
It's amazing to see how these different cultural traditions offer us new ways to think about life and death and everything in between.
It's truly inspiring.
Mhm.
It shows us that there are many ways to approach these profound themes, and that each culture has something unique to offer.
This deep dive has taken us from the origins of Halloween to its global reach.
Right.
From medieval soul cakes to modern-day haunted houses,
Huh.
and even into the heart of cultural beliefs about death and the afterlife. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
And I hope it's inspired you to think more deeply about the significance of this holiday
And you too.
and how it reflects our own relationship with mortality.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the final provocative thought we can leave our listener with?
Well, you've explored the many layers of Halloween, from its ancient roots to its modern expressions.
Right.
You've seen how it blends the sacred and the profane, the spooky and the sweet.
Mm.
And you've considered how different cultures view death and remembrance. So the question is,
Okay.
if Halloween is at its core about confronting mortality with humor and a bit of mischief,
Yeah.
what does your ideal celebration of life and death look like? What traditions would you create or embrace to honor both the light and shadow aspects of our existence?
That's a wonderful question to ponder. It encourages us to go beyond the surface-level trappings of Halloween
Right.
and consider its deeper meaning and how it resonates with our own personal beliefs.
Exactly. And by engaging with these themes in a thoughtful and personal way,
Mm-hmm.
we can create meaningful rituals and celebrations that truly reflect who we are and what we value.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Halloween. We hope you've enjoyed this journey as much as we have.
Absolutely.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.